Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex, coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... With the books I'm showing, unfortunately, a lot of these are out of print, and unfortunately, a lot of them go for triple digits, or just an amount of money that I'm not willing to spend on a book. And I do think that if a lot of times, if you're just patient, you'll end up finding these books in like a used bookstore or like a Goodwill or something like that, which that's really what I've done over the years. And of course, as the title of this video says, I'm focusing on books that are in regards to horror movie novelizations, which, from my understanding, novelizations were a big thing back in the day because it was cheaper to buy a book than it was to actually purchase a VHS. So that's just absolutely insane to think that VHS movies were so expensive that you had to rely on the novelization or just waiting for the movie to come on TV to enjoy it. But obviously, we're no longer in that decade, so novelizations, they do still exist here and there, but it's extremely rare to find them. And I think that's mainly just because we have such easy access to movies now that novelizations aren't necessarily needed. Even still, the few that I have read, I have noticed where there are differences between the book and the movie. And if you can't find any of these books, just know that the movies are out there. You can totally watch the movies. Those are definitely easy access. And so you might just have to deal with the movie until you can actually get your hands on a reasonable copy of one of these books. First up on the list is a book that I thought I would grab it while I had the opportunity, even though I don't have the first two books. And this is just something where I've looked around online hoping to find part 1 and 2, but I don't think they were ever adapted into a novelization. But this is a book that I found at a used bookstore for dirt cheap, and that is Child's Play 3, based on the screenplay by Don Mancini and adapted into the novel by Matthew J. Costello. Which, if you're familiar with the Chucky movies, this is the one where Andy has been sent to military school. He's an older teenager at this point, and Chucky goes after him trying to possess his body. But in the process of doing so, Chucky redirects his attention to another child, and from there, Andy tries to save the day. So I really enjoyed the movie of this. I think that the book is going to be fun. If anyone knows if part 1 or 2 exist in book form, please let me know because I would like to add that to my collection if it's not too expensive. I mean, I'm the kind of person where if I really want it, I'll put down just a little money, but there's no way I'm putting down triple digits for anything in paperback, so we can forget that part. But yeah, this is something that I knew I had to have, and hopefully if I'm just patient, the stars will align in my favor. That is, if the first 2 books exist. Following that is a book that I would really consider to be my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which this was something that as a movie, I had seen it as a child when I was staying over at my grandparents' house. It came on late one Friday night, and I remember it ended up scaring the hell out of me, which it's a little cheesy now, but for what it was, it did its job when I was a kid. Which, this is the Amicus horror movie classic known as Tales from the Crypt. And I was able to find this for a dirt cheap price online. I don't think the seller really knew what he had. And even still, I consider this to be a really good copy. I did have to kind of tape it back together, but for me, it works. And this was written by Jack Orlick. I think I said that right, Jack Olick. I think that's how you pronounce it. But on the back, you can see some images that were from the movie. And this is something that I don't know why I haven't read it yet. I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it. It's very thin, so I can totally do it in one sitting. But if you haven't seen the movie, it is all kinds of fun, and it is not hard to get your hands on. The movie has 4 short stories in it, very similar to how the Tales from the Crypt comics were laid out. And the short stories regard a homicidal Santa, a zombie who is exacting his revenge on Valentine's Day, a wish that's gone horribly wrong, and a horrible administrator who's taken over for a house of the blind, and after he treats them very poorly, they revolt against him. So this is definitely going to be a lot of fun, I believe. I wish I would have already read it so I can go a little bit more in depth about it and gush about it. But just know, if you love vintage horror anthologies, you really need to see the movie because it is so much fun. Up next is a novelization of a movie that I had seen back in the Blockbuster days. I remember renting it because my mom said, "Oh my God, you've got to see this. You're gonna love it." And after I watched it, I couldn't help but think, had this movie never existed, I don't know if we would have received anything like Fatal Attraction. So I am very grateful for this movie existing because it did spawn off a lot of other great movies in that subgenre, but this is Play Misty for me. And this is the adaptation by Paul J. Gillette, which this is, of course, your basic story about a man who thinks he's going to just simply hit it and quit it, and there not be any repercussions, which, of course, there are. And I always enjoy stories like this because it's hard to determine who is in the wrong. Like, there's the man who's leading the person on, but also at the same time, the person definitely goes overboard. And I remember thinking with the movie, I couldn't really ever feel sorry for either of the characters. I felt sorry for, like, Clint Eastwood's girlfriend because, you know, she didn't ask for any of this crap. But I do remember when I saw Fatal Attraction, I did end up feeling sorry for the Glenn Close character until she boiled the bunny. So up until that moment, I could relate to her. And this just is one of those good old-fashioned suspenseful classics. Again, it's hard to get your hands on a copy of the novelization, but the movie is easy to find. And again, thin book. Don't know why I haven't read it. As a matter of fact, I think I ended up finding this one at a Goodwill. It was definitely a good price and I couldn't say no, so of course I grabbed it up. Following that is a book that was gifted to me by my good online friend named Hanny. And this came about because we had buddy read the novelization of John Carpenter's Halloween, which was written by Richard Curtis. And following that, she surprised me by sending me another novelization by that same author, which is Squirm. Like, I love the cover of this because it is so nasty, it's repulsive, it's just disgusting, and I love it because the movie was all of those things as well. And on the back, you see that there are some pictures of the movie, and this is one of those movies where it is complete cheese. It is B-rated, it's campy, and it's definitely something where when they were making this, I think they were aware that it wasn't going to win like any Academy Awards or anything. But the premise of this story is where a small town is hit by a storm, and after the ground gets struck by a bolt of lightning, it causes all of the worms to come up to the surface where they become man-eaters. Yeah. Yeah. And there's some scenes in this that are just really outlandish. I haven't read the book. I don't know how close to the movie that the book is because when Richard Curtis did the novelization of Halloween, he took some liberties and kind of changed it up from what we saw in the movie. So I'm kind of wondering if he's going to do the same thing here. Even still, I look forward to reading this because the movie was so much fun, and you can probably find the movie just about anywhere. The book, not so much. Up next is a book that was adapted from a movie that I thoroughly enjoyed as a child. As a matter of fact, I enjoyed part 1 and 2 equally, and from time to time I still pull them out to indulge in nostalgia purposes. Also, I do feel like the first movie was an awakening movie for me, because while I watched it, I was like, oh my god, that guy is hot as hell. Which, I'm talking about the one and only Julian Sands in Warlock. And this is one of those circumstances where I really wish Julian Sands was still with us. I think he was a great actor. I loved his voice. I wish he could have done some audiobooks or something. But one of my friends met him at a convention, and I had given her my DVD of Warlock, and she said he was really a sweet person, and he signed it for me. So that's something I'm going to hold on to like there is no tomorrow. But this book was adapted into novel format by Ray Garden, and it was based on this screenplay by D.T. Tui. I hope I'm saying that name right. But the movies are easy to get your hands on. In the first one, it's about a warlock who escapes the Salem witch trials, and he does this through time travel, which brings him to our current day, and by the book standards, that's the 1980s. And as he is on a journey to bring forth the devil himself, he is pursued by a witch hunter who is trying to stop him before everything just goes to hell in a handbasket. So, yeah, the paperback of this, you can sometimes find a copy that's really not too badly priced on eBay. I've heard tell that this is actually quite a bit more grotesque than the movie, which I believe the author who wrote this is a splatterpunk author, so I'm totally looking forward to that. And this is a little bit thicker than some of the other books I showed off, so I'm imagining we're going to get a little bit more than what was in the movie in this book. So, one day soon, hopefully. Following that is a book that's based off of one of my favorite horror movies, and that is The Fog, which is based off of the John Carpenter Deborah Hill screenplay. And the book is written by Dennis Etchison. I hope I'm saying that right. I suck at pronouncing names. But I found this for 35 cents at a flea market, and it's actually in decent condition because online copies of this go for a pretty penny. And on the back, it does have some images of the movie. And I hated the remake. The remake absolutely sucked. It was your basic Millennium remake where you could tell it was catering to ages 13 and 14. And it sucked. It just didn't do anything for me. But the original movie is definitely one of my favorite ghost stories. And it's based around this small little California town that has had their anniversary. And as the anniversary begins, the fog starts rolling in, and there's something in the fog that's killing off the townspeople, which we discover that these are the ghosts of those who their ancestors had wronged. So, yeah, this is a lot of fun. I've always enjoyed the whole idea of ghost pirates. I wish there was more in that subgenre. Unfortunately, it isn't. And of course, love the cover of this. Moving forward, we have a novelization that I think only exists as a sequel. I don't think there's a horror movie novelization that goes prior to this one, because the original movie was inspired by the #1 best-selling book by Peter Benchley, known as Jaws. So obviously, I'm speaking about Jaws Part 2. Which was written by Hank Searles, and it was based on the screenplay by Howard Sackler and Dorothy Tristan. Now, I'm a huge fan of the Jaws movies, even the crappy ones. I do feel like Jaws Part 1 and 2 were definitely the best. After that, it took a nosedive, and only people who have a bad taste in cinema enjoy them, which I think I have a good bad taste, so that's why I enjoy how crappy they are. But I don't necessarily know what to expect with this book, and the reason why I say that is if it follows the movie, then we're going to have the whole storyline follow with Brody and everything, because what Brody experienced in the movie and what Brody did in the movie was completely different than what he did in the book. And as a matter of fact, when I read Peter Benchley's Jaws, I was so surprised to see how different the book was from the movie, which I need to revisit that so I can give it a good, thorough review. But if this follows the Peter Benchley book, this could be quite a bit different than what we saw in the movie. So, don't know what to expect there, but it could easily be that maybe the two are merged. Movie and book could merge into this. I don't know. So I do love the cover art. That's the thing about the Jaws movies. I really did find the cover art to be fun, and I'm happy to have this simply for that reason. Following that is a book that I need to doctor the cover of because it's starting to come apart a little bit, but of course that's nothing that Scotch tape won't fix. And I'm talking about Cat People by Gary Bradner, which I've read Gary Bradner before. He did the novels of the Howling trilogy, which was a lot of fun. I remember enjoying part 1 and 3 more than I did the second book, even though the second book was still good. And considering those books were about werewolves, I totally understand why they picked Bradner to do the novelization, as this is also about people turning into beast. Which, on the back, we have some images of the movie, which, as you can see, there's Malcolm McDowell and Natasha Kinski, and they did phenomenal in this movie. This is a remake, by the way. This was done in the 1980s. The original was a black and white that was directed by Val Lewton. Both movies are absolutely beautiful, and I feel that they're very suitable, and even though there's some differences, I think that it has enough in common with one another to comment on society during that time, which, if you're unfamiliar with Cat People, this is the story of a breed of people that turn into black leopards when they become sexually aroused. And there's just so much fun that I had with the movies, and the original especially was just, I can't get over just how beautiful it was and how beautiful this one was, even though this one had gore in it compared to the original film. So I am excited to see what Bradner is going to do with this. I think that he's going to be able to just knock the ball out of the park, but watching the movies, they're easy to get your hands on. I highly recommend the original before the remake, and just watch them maybe nearby one another, because I think you'll see a difference in society between the two films. Another book on this list is one that was inspired by the Amicus horror movie classic known as The Vault of Horror. And this is written by Jack Olick, who also wrote Tales from the Crypt. And, well, the Tales from the Crypt novelization, not the comic book itself. But very much like the comic book, The Vault of Horror is an anthology-based horror story. And I remember seeing the movie late night over at my grandparents' house. It probably was something like a double feature that played right after Tales from the Crypt. I can't necessarily remember, but I do remember that the movie is a lot of fun. You can get your hands on it pretty easily, and it has 4 tales in there. One is about a guy who has gotten himself some blood money, and in the process he has encountered vampires. There's another story about a greedy guy who ends up stealing a magician's trick where he climbs to the top of a rope, and once he gets up there, he finds some horrible stuff. It doesn't necessarily note exactly what he finds, or at least it didn't in the movie. And there's also a story that I love to this day, which is about a woman who killed her bastard of a husband, and she was very OCD about how she disposed of the body. Also, there was a story about an artist who used voodoo to exact his revenge on his critics. So those are the 4 stories that I remember. I don't know exactly if there's anything extra in the book. I don't think there is because it's a pretty thin book. So I think this is probably going to stay pretty true to the movie. And once again, if you have not seen the movie, I highly recommend that you do so. As a matter of fact, just about all of the Amicus movies are fun. Like, I sometimes have a day where I'll just play nothing but Amicus movies back to back to back, and it's nothing but vintage British short stories. So, yeah, they're a lot of fun. Up next is The Prophecy, which was written by David Seltzer, who did The Omen. And for those who are wondering, no, this is not based off of the movie that had Christopher Walken as Gabriel. This is based off of a 1980s environmental horror movie, which, if memory serves me correct, it took place in a northern state nearby a reservation, and it regards a body of water that had become contaminated with toxins, which, after the water became contaminated, it caused animals to become deformed and go crazy. And it's definitely one of those movies where it shows that man is Earth's greatest enemy. So I think that the movie was fairly tame. It was PG, if I remember correct. And I'm not certain if the book will be as tame as that. It's kind of a thicker book, so I think we're going to gain a little bit more in it than we did in the movie. But I feel like this is definitely a movie where if you haven't seen it, you need to. It does still hold up to today in quite a few different ways. Up next is the satanic classic, The Omen by David Seltzer, which I really did enjoy the first 3 movies of this series. I think that the first 3 movies were absolute gold. Even the 4th one, which I think was like a made-for-TV movie and it had a girl instead of a boy being the Antichrist, I thought that was pretty good. It's been forever since I've seen the 4th one. I might pull it out and watch it tonight now that I'm thinking about it. But as far as the remake goes, I really didn't care for the remake. It just felt like your basic Millennium remake cash grab that was really popular during that time. And yeah, if you're going to watch The Omen, go with the original series. And like, if you don't know what to expect, it's pretty obvious that this is going to be a child who is the Antichrist. And under this circumstance, though, it is a child of a politician who is the Antichrist. So, yeah, what better way to put the devil than in politics, right? So, with this edition, it does have some pages in there that have some screenshots of the movie. So, we have that. And that's what I love about some of these books, is you just don't find novelizations that have images of the movie in it. And I imagine that for people who didn't have access to VHS back then, and they read the book and saw these images, it kind of gave them a clear understanding of how the characters may have appeared. So, yeah, those are fun. And I do know this. I am probably going to eventually read this pretty soon. I know that they're doing a new Omen movie, which is called The First Omen. The trailer looked pretty good. And so I would like to read this before actually seeing that movie, just to, you know, get me ready for it. Up next is the novelization of Damien, The Omen 2. And this one was written by Joseph Howard. And very much like the first book, we do have a few pages here that show off the movie. So we get, you know, moments like this in the book for people to have a better visual and everything, which, as I mentioned, I really feel like the second Omen is just as good as the first one. I feel like in some ways it's actually maybe a little more better. And the only reason why I say that is because I remember this being the first horror movie that kind of made me feel a little not so safe. It made me feel like my stomach was about to turn, which that was due to a scene where a woman had her eyes pecked out by a raven, and what followed was even more ghastly. But yeah, this one continues forward and follows Damien as he's become 13 years old at this point, and he's in a military school. And we see as he has gotten older, he has become more knowledgeable of who he is. And so it's really just chronicling his life to see him go from being a single-digit child to a teenager and seeing what he is capable of and understanding what he's capable of. Following that is the novelization of The Final Conflict, The Omen Part 3, which this was written by Gordon McGill, and very much like the previous two books, we do have some images in here, which there is Sam Neill, who later played in Jurassic Park. I think Sam Neill is a phenomenal actor. And as a matter of fact, I think he played a perfect Damien. I think that he was very attractive as Damien. And I think that he was also very ruthless. But I feel like The Final Conflict was a great way to end the Omen trilogy, which the Final Conflict is where Damien has gotten old enough now to run for an election, and we see how everyone who tries to prevent him from becoming ambassador ends up dying in horrible ways, and it becomes very cultish in the sense of him rising to politics. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Oakley dokley. So if I'm going to show off the first 3 Omen books, I of course need to show off the other 2, which these are not novelizations because movies had not existed of these when they were published. But here is the Omen Part 4, Armageddon 2000. Don't know what to expect with that. And then we have the Omen Part 5, The Abomination. And while I really have no clue what these 2 books have in store, I have heard tell that there is a woman who births the Antichrist in this, and she does it through her butt. Yeah. Alrighty, so that is my part 1 of a 2-parter in regards to horror movie novelizations. I'm going to do a second part next weekend, so definitely be on the lookout for that. And now that I'm at the end of this video, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if there is a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll do that. Also, I do have a $10 tier available, where for $10 a month, I'll still give you the shout out as you see here, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month, I send out one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off and do whatever you like with it. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can continue to have a good time together. Also, if you are not following me on social media and you would like to, links to my Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are all available in the description section of this episode. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more videos coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.